Well, we went from one colour to another. Welcome, everyone, to a brand new concept. Here it is, Smart Casual, episode 2. We're back. My name is Jason, and I'm joined by, who are you?
I knew this was my opening. Thanks, Jason. Great to see you. My name's Mariya.
Good to see you, Mariya. Great to be back. And I tell you what, when we met a couple of weeks back and then sort of had a couple of chats here and there and just said, look, there's so much negativity and heartache in the world, and it can't go on forever. But what happens when the system changes and it turns good? Where do we go from there? Like, what's the point of it? Do we just pick ourselves off the floor and dust ourselves off like we've, escaped, a battle zone and survive? But it's more about, it's not so much survival anymore. It's about, you want to thrive. I don't want to get back to zero. I want to expand. I didn't get this far in life to just be nowhere. That doesn't make any sense to me. So that's what Smart Casual is about for me, was to have a discussion with somebody else who is like-minded, for an audience that I feel is craving for something new, fresh, inviting and exciting, and a restoration of all the reasons why Australia has been the lucky country for so long and is currently struggling, but we want to live a better life. How about you?
Yeah, I agree with you, Jason, and that's exactly the reason why I joined this show with yourself. I think so many news readers and podcasts focus on all the negatives, just, endless tunnels of sorrow and hopelessness. So I hope that with Smart Casual, we can bring you some positivity, some hope, some inspiration, and a different outlook on life, and, just explore exciting and interesting and relative topics about what's happening in the world today.
And so there it is. And look, when you think about the struggles that are going on, and this week we have, some of the most horrific possible news. Not one, but 2 murders recorded on camera. In any other time in history, Mariya, that would never be shown or seen. And despite social media being used as a tool to provide that type of freedom, but at the same time governments censor stuff that should probably be censored, such as what I've just described, is not. And I don't think it can get any lower than that. If that's what we are consuming today, we have a massive problem, and that's got to change one way or another. No one needs to see that on camera, but for the only reason for the change, for it to never happen again, and for society to get out of that horrific status that it's in.
Yeah. No wonder everyone is, experiencing PTSD, mental health, anxiety, more than ever before. It's because of these graphic images and constant news and shows all focusing on murder. And it is the reality of, these events that are happening that are very messed up. But at the same time, and I agree with you, it's like the war. You have to understand and see it to make sure it doesn't get repeated, because they are trying to rewrite history, as you probably know as well. That's another conspiracy, rewriting World War II that didn't exist. And I'm sure through your history, ancestors, that it most definitely did exist. It's a true reality, a stark, very, very awful reality that we all lived through and still carry through our ancestral history from Eastern Europe. All of our movies, all of my topics of discussion growing up revolved around the experiences that my grandparents and then my my great-grandparents went through, and then my grandparents obviously carried with themselves. So I'm getting a little bit off topic there, but yeah, I think the point we're making here is that we have to not forget, but at the same time, let's focus on things that are actually going to make a positive impact on society.
Yeah, well, when you get back to basics and you think about those times, growing up, my grandmother's telling me stories, my mother telling me stories and reminding me, what went on. And then you think about how that brings you together as a family, particularly across generations. And I'm reminded of the movie, an old movie now, The Bonfire of the Vanities, strange film that came out in the 80s. Tom Hanks, Melanie Griffith, Morgan Freeman played the judge, and it was his comments as a judge when a whole bunch of corruption happens. And it's one of those stories about taking down a great big American multimillionaire. And how they try and do it is through corrupt methods in a courtroom. And Morgan Freeman plays the judge, and he catches out a man of the clergy lying in form of evidence. And it's a black man talking to a black man, and he stands up, and Morgan Freeman's got a shaved head, and he's this very impressive judge with his robes. And he lectures the not the audience, but the people in the courtroom, and he says, decency, what your grandmother taught you. And when he gets to that point, everyone shuts up and they have to listen to what he's got to say, because he's saying, how can you possibly cheat in order to take someone down, whether they did something dishonest or not? It's a standard. And that's my point there. And it's not a particularly great movie, but there are some great scenes in it. And ultimately, it's a satisfying movie. It was a big flop, worth a fortune, didn't do very well, but worth seeing if you get to see it. But decency, what your grandmother taught you. So when you talk about those times and the horrific times that our ancestors, our grandparents, went through in Eastern Europe, but then you get to sit around a table in Australia and eat the same food that they ate, and you love that food, you realize that there's a whole lot more, like, out of the negativity, if that makes sense. And I'm sure that we ate the same food growing up. Even just to have, for me, a bowl of beetroot soup, borscht, that my grandmother would make, and to replicate that today for my family, I feel like my grandmother is sitting on my shoulder every time I'm in the kitchen peeling the beetroot. It's just how it is. Do you have any stories like that?
You see, Jason, I am probably ashamed to say that I probably haven't carried the legacy of the beetroot making tradition. So my mum was very, very upset that I'm the first, family member, or female family member, that doesn't know how to make the beetroot soup.
That's hilarious.
Happily eat it.
There you go. Bring me more sour cream, please.
Yes, well, everything in Eastern European is very, very time consuming to make. It's not, a barbecue that you just slap on the barbie and chop up some salad. It's quite exhausting to cook all the food. But when we do get some time, vareniki, which are their dumplings, traditional Ukrainian dumplings, we love to make those. But, we take up a whole day. We sit down and we have a few people and we mold them, we make them, and we eat all of them in a day.
That's exactly right. The cherry vareniki, the sour cherry, was something special with some double cream, just spectacular. My mum was the world's busiest woman. She was a nurse. She never sat still. And she wasn't particularly interested in cooking. She cooked for necessity, but she wasn't interested in the traditional food. So she would go along to my grandmother, her mother, and my grandmother would make such a fuss, and that's what it was. But I couldn't understand that if my grandmother was such a great cook and everyone recognized that, why my mother wasn't interested. But I worked out, of course, it was just time consuming. So that's where my interest came from. That was my point. And I figured that my brothers weren't interested, so I wanted to take this up. So I learned from both my grandmothers how to cook, and I would actually get, in school holidays, I would get my father to drive me over to my grandmother's so that I could spend a day or two in the kitchen and learn and talk and get all these great stories, etc. And it was just something that I chose to do. I just loved to do it. So that's where it came from. But Mum used to say, I'm too busy. And I'd say, Mum, what are you doing? And I say, you just bought frozen onions that are diced up in a packet that they used to sell back in the 80s and 90s. What are you doing that for? I haven't got time, she used to say. And yet she was a nurse, and that was just how she saw things. But I used to laugh. That was the mocking of the family. Like, please, Mum, how long does it take to slice up an onion? But that's how busy my mum was. So, Mariya, I fully understand. I sympathise. And one day you may change. As Mum got into her 50s, she got into the kitchen and she took some interest. And started to appeal to her in the later part of her life. So there you go. So that is the cooking segment over and done with at this point in the show. But that's why I wanted to bring that up. I think it's so important because when the world is tough, there's something really nice about being able to close the door on the world and to create something that you absolutely love in collective with the rest of the family that's impenetrable. And I think that's the point I wanted to make.
Yeah. I think really, like you said, it's your grandmas that keep those traditions because your parents don't have time often. And, I was raised by my grandmas growing up to the age of 5 until we moved to Australia. And then I was, it was just my parents and I. And being an only child as well, you have to keep an only child amused. They're actually probably more high maintenance than having brothers and sisters. So my mum had to be, my friend, the mum, the teacher, you name it. So I am very grateful for the fact that a lot of those family traditions have been passed through. And I got to experience those with my great-grandmother even. I went back to Ukraine to look after my great-grandmother in her last year actually, and she was still very with it mentally, not physically so much. I was 16 from memory. So it's amazing, that at that age, my great-grandmother who lived through World War II was still alive, and she, had little cutouts of newspapers, back from 40 years ago. We still use our sugar holder. You put sugar into, and it's from back before World War II. Those pieces are really, really treasured. And it's really actually interesting that this piece of crockery on it has Russia and Ukraine together. Now, when would you see that in this day and age with what's happening now? I'd probably get burnt overseas to have that piece of crockery because of the world being so divided. But that's how we were. The two nations were always very united. We were one up until very, very recent times.
Do you know, my grandparents were Russian and they lived in Liverpool in southwestern Sydney. And occasionally when we went over to visit my grandfather died when I was 4. We would have other friends come over, family friends would come visit, people that I'd maybe only met for the first or second time. And on one particular occasion, I remember my mum saying that one of her school friends was coming over and that she was Ukrainian. And they spoke the same language, they looked the same, they ate the same, they had the same jokes, the same anecdotes. And my whole life, I thought it was the same. I just thought it was like Melbourne and Sydney. I never knew a difference. Isn't that odd? And yet today, through all our ignorance, we assume that there is some great division and fight. And of course, it's territorial and there's certainly other reasons, but the people for whom governments are meant to serve, most of this stuff they don't care about. And because I would assume that you could be on the border between Ukraine and Russia today and you would be best friends with your neighbor on the other side. You just don't care who they are or what their background is.
Before the war, sure. Yeah, I think those border locations are now the scariest, obviously, to live because life is underground there for those people. And it's actually the Russian people who, both Russian and Ukrainian, but it's the Russian people who are in a huge scary place for them to be because the Russian government's pretty much, plummeting those areas and killing out those parts of border between Russia and Ukraine. So And the Ukrainians, obviously, a lot of them can't escape and get out. It's, yes, virtually murdering your own nation on that border front line, because it's like that. It used to all be one country. Many nations were part of the USSR. And once they gained independence, although it sounds like independence is such a great thing, in reality, it actually created this huge crime rates, which is another reason why we look to immigrate, because it was just a scary time to survive in Ukraine in the early 90s. And it went from, communism, which the Western society doesn't understand the true meaning of what communism actually means. And I'm sure if you speak to your grandma, my grandma, they would probably say it was, in a way, some of their happiest, well, not grandma, mum, sorry, some of the happiest times, because there wasn't this huge capitalism. So once capitalism came into the picture, it really just stripped the land of all its wealth, of all of its resources, and huge corruption in government. I mean, there's always been corruption in government, but that's really when it started. Petty crime, you couldn't walk down the street without getting knifed for a handbag, things like that. And yeah, we're 360, and we're back to where we were 20 years ago again, where it's scarier times now. And I just found out the other day that Poland's being under attack now. So drones have been thrown over Poland as well, which is interesting.
It's an unexpected escalation, isn't it, in a direction that you didn't expect, because you're hoping for a peace moment. My grandfather was thrown into a Siberian concentration camp for opposing communism back in the 20s. So it is a century ago. But what you say is important, because if you go from crashing communism, which, if you talk about, per capita wealth, you can appreciate that people in the Eastern European nations were certainly poorer than those in the West. So when you compare apples with apples, you go, well, that system doesn't work compared to the free market system. But when you take away a so-called safety net and you move to full capitalism and there's no safety net and people are starving, well, that's where you run into the problems and the crime rate that obviously has to escalate, because people need to live. And I, as I'm saying that, I'm thinking when I watched, it was the Godfather movies. And I remember specifically watching The Godfather 2, and you're introduced to the character of Vito Corleone, and who is the Godfather, but as a young man. And when he's living in New York, he is introduced into a minor crime wave. And that's how he starts to become a gangster before he gets into a legitimate business. Mm-hmm. And if there is lack, if there is nothing, then what are you supposed to do? That's the point. That's why you have governments to build and provide the services, the education, the health, etc., create investment. I'm then reminded when I was at school and studying Mao in China and the 5-year plans that failed and failed and failed, so that China becomes a communist government that runs a capitalist society, which is also interesting. So they're trying to get the best of both worlds, but there are the haves and the have-nots, like in any society, because China being, the global factory, there are people working for peanuts, building, iPhones, for example, and that would be a hard thing too. But if you're provided for, that's one thing. But this is the funny thing about the West, isn't it, now, that you are meant to live on your own, but the system is corrupted to the point where most young people today, you would feel that a majority of young people today feel that they can't cope in a society that requires their self-sufficiency. And so they become dependent on the government, to the point that today now they've become militant that the government go out and hunt and gather for them for their needs. And at the process, their only personal development is a negative one that has created a higher rate of disability, a higher rate of victimhood, a higher rate of discontent, a higher rate of blame, and almost subcontracting out that responsibility. And that's what I find is so difficult. So it's almost like we're going through a psychological restructure at the same time as we're going through a physical restructure, if that makes sense.
Yes. Oh, exactly. Like when I talk to a lot of my peers and friends, you know, a few years ago about my experience of COVID being a awful, haunting experience, something that I never want to live through again, not just because of my personal experience, but because of what the world went through and what, you know, the government's, the centralized system planned for to happen. But their experience was it's great because the government was handing them money. All they had to do was sit home and watch Netflix. And I just realized and went, you know, I do not relate to this society. How can you aspire to that kind of well-being and lifestyle and say that it was great? I mean, there were some businesses that boomed through that period, especially if you were smart in terms of how you marketed yourself online, I'm sure. But the majority of people, you know, really, really struggled to make ends meet. And you compare a full-time employee with a casual out of school or even school student, and they were taking home the same COVID payment. Like, it was a joke. So it was all done, obviously, all designed in that way for a reason. And, you know, now we're having to pay back that crazy, crazy debt that's being brought on our society. But I think, yeah, the younger generation will never understand the true picture of what they're having to pay for now. It's actually them who are having to pay for this more than anyone else.
You know, there's two things I want to say about that. One is that I feel like that whole period was a trial for a universal basic income, how that would be accepted, and more so to prove how many people would go down Netflix pathway and take the money to stay home and do nothing. And therefore they would realize that there's a level of compliance in the population. They go, well, 20% of people are going to take this, or 30%, that's enough to get us reelected. So we can do that if that's the way they want to play it, given that absolute power, certainly on the left, believing in the collective, with not a real grip on how finances actually work, because it can't go on forever. If everyone gets free money, it doesn't grow on trees. There's got to be a way that you can get it. However, on the other side of it, when you do that and you push so much money into an economy, and then we talk about the debt that needs to be paid back, the best friend of debt is inflation. For example, let's say you borrow $500,000 to buy a property today, and that property is $600,000 and the bank lends you the $500 against the $600. The value of the property goes up over time to, let's say, it doubles to $1.2 million. Well, you still only have a $500,000 debt. But one would assume that if the property values go up to 1.2 million, incomes you would hope would double, but they don't. But they certainly go up. They don't stagnate. So it makes the debt easier to repay. So when a government does it, and they always borrow on the margin incredible amounts of money that at the time we say is obscene, $500 million thrown down the toilet in COVID. But if you inflate yourself out of that for 10 years, that $1 trillion, I mean, not billion, is nothing in the scheme of things in 10 years' time when you're talking, you know, budgets of trillions of dollars is what I'm saying. So it's self-serving for the government to a point until you realize that you've tipped over the edge. There's too many people now getting a universal basic income in the world of artificial intelligence where you can't get a job even if you wanted one. And then you get to the tipping point where the system collapses. But again, governments with a short-term focus of, 3 years, 4 years between elections, they're never going to see that. They're never going to see it. They're just going to keep going. And so it's like there's a toxin built into the system. And if you keep people uninformed, then they're going to just go along to get along, because they're also only living election cycle to election cycle. And seriously, how do people, the general person, live? If you're living in the moment, like, on a day-to-day basis, and you're a young person with not a whole lot of ambition, aren't you living, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, but if you're a video game player that doesn't work and wants to stay home and do that or watch Netflix, aren't you just living game to game? And therefore it wouldn't matter what happens tomorrow or next month or next year?
Good question to ask. It's a good question to ask. And
so if that's the case, you don't care. As long as I'm being fed and watered, as my mother would say, I'm just going to do it. So I once proposed this, Mariya. I once said, if it were possible for a certain portion of society to voluntarily put their hand up and say, listen, I will happily take a low ball UBI in today's dollars of, let's say, when I said it at the time, $250 a week, I reckon today, if you could put if a person's voluntarily said, I will happily live in a room, provided you send me 3 meals a day and I'll just play video games and I'll leave you alone and I'll make no contribution, but you don't have to worry about me, just pay me X amount of dollars a week, I think people would take that offer and they'd be happily live in a room and play video games for the rest of their life.
Yeah, sadly, I think that is how the system has created our society from a young age over the last sort of 20, 30 years. So it's a stark reality of depending on these schemes or scams, as I say. So many scams came out of COVID. Look at the NDIS scam, how many billions of dollars have been poured into that. And I know so many friends who have left, jobs in teaching, nursing, to pursue running an NDIS-based business to make money out of that, because the governments were literally handing out money left, right and centre. I think only now they're slowly starting to, tighten and make it more difficult for providers to be able to service those needs, and for a reason, I'm sure, because I'm sure a lot of abuse has come out of that as well. People who have absolutely no experience in those industries, caring for disabled individuals. Our taxpayers' dollars thrown around again. So I think really no point talking about governments, because we know that we can't rely on them. But what we can do is rely on ourselves and being sufficient and self-sufficient, and looking at ways in how we can get out of that centralised universal system which you are talking about. And funny that you bring that up, because I'm just started this year working for myself and realised that having to start my own business, I'm going to have to create this awful thing called a digital ID. And so I'm just stalling on setting that up, because I don't want to have a digital footprint, because I've pushed back on that with everything to date. Don't want a digital license because it's all used, it's all done so that it can be centralised, through one click. And, the ATO already is able to do that, utilising our, details, everything that we do through our taxation. I don't know if you've ever had experience of not paying for a government service, I'll put it that way, a polite way, not paying for a government service, and they will come and garnish your accounts. They actually have access to garnish your own accounts. Now, how is it that we have allowed this to happen in our society?
Isn't that so interesting? Because there's that famous video where Kerry Packer is sitting before this inquiry, and they ask him if he's evading tax, and he said, "I'm not evading. I'm just paying my minimum, minimizing my tax. You guys don't do a good enough job that I would want to reward you." And now we're on the other side. That's not even a consideration. It's just an authority that says we're going to take, which is very mafioso style. It's like how the gangsters operate. And that's the problem. And I maintain that government basically operates like the mafia, and there's no reason why they wouldn't, because they behave like it and they associate with. And that's what they've learned. Yeah. It's learned behavior.
Yeah.
That's how it is. Now, on that digital ID, is that because you have to set up a company? Is that the reason why? Right. And that's when you set up a company. If you were to operate as a sole trader, for example, would that be different, but therefore the structures are different?
Yes, because as a sole trader, I don't believe you need to have a company. Obviously, you have a enterprise, which is different to an ACN structure. But I think you can choose to go either way with being a sole trader. But as an independent contractor, you don't need any of those things. So you can just continue doing what you do and not having that digital ID linked to what is your company name.
Except, of course, if you're building something that's not as a sole trader, it's a company, it's a different entity, and there it is. It's a challenge, isn't it?
It's a challenge.
Well, that is hard work. Does that say to you that maybe you want to become an employee again, if that was even an option to you, as to avoid, or are you stuck between Hobson's choice, no choice at all, that you're just going to have to one day sadly succumb to it?
Well, I know that some people have pushed back by attempting to do it through the paper applications, but I don't actually believe that there is any way to download those paper applications anymore unless you downloaded them a few years ago through the COVID times, because they got rid of all of those paper applications in the same way as you used to be able to submit your tax, paper version. But now it's all digital at the click of your fingertips. They say it's so easy, but really it's easy so that it's easy for them to audit what you submit, because it's much harder to audit handwriting. No one's going to want to go through a million handwritten forms, but digital, it's 2 seconds. So in answer to your question, I think that the central measures will come into place, and they probably are already in place for employees, because we relinquish our rights to our employer. So I don't necessarily think that that's going to benefit me in any way, going back to that employee-employer relationship. It'd probably be more if I found that it was more suitable for my time. Not for my time, at the time for me, with what I was doing in my field of work. But yeah, that's sort of the reality of today. In everything, they're trying to clamp that digital identity stamp on us.
It's breathtaking to think, isn't it, that you literally feel like that your privacy threshold has been breached, and that you were being treated like a criminal. I was in the local Woolworths the other day, and they've now put those gates on the self-service checkouts, that when you walk out, that the glass gates open up and let you out. And they only put them in the major shopping centres, and now it's in the little shopping centre. And I really take offence to it, because I feel like I go in there, I pay more than I have to pay for the same product at Aldi. I then find that the checkouts are closed with a rope across it, like "do not come here," guiding you down the self-service checkout, where a human being watches as you're working for them for free without training, insurance, or a staff discount, and I have to learn how to do it on the spot. And then it is presumed that I am going to steal from them after working for free and paying overs before I walk out of the shop, and then the gates open for me. Like, why do I have to be presumed guilty before innocent whilst working for free for a corporation that's the richest in the country? That to me just breaches everything it is to be Australian. And I just want other opportunities to open up, and so I don't have to go there. That I find that a sick, sorry state of being, that I am treated like a criminal whilst working for them for free.
Yeah. It's easier said than done, but that's why I try and say can all those big suppliers and try and shop local where possible. But, it's not always possible, because sometimes you need, specific products which your tiny IGA won't sell or don't have access to. So, but I know that one good thing that's come out of all of this is it's really pushed people to the edge to create their own communities and opportunities and self-sufficient markets. And I think this is something that we'll probably be discussing more on this show in terms of what is available for people who don't want to be part of the centralised system. And there's more pushback than ever. And that's why we're having so many of these rallies, big national rally in Australia tomorrow as well, anti-government rally, because people are just fed up with the system more than ever before. And I think that they're probably scared seeing these numbers. They're probably bigger than they were through the height of COVID as well. So that just really shows that more people are waking up, and even people who may regret some of the, decisions that they made through the last 4 or 5 years in terms of giving in their bodily autonomy. Some people, didn't know at the time either, sadly. But I think the pushback is happening, which is really good.
It's certainly required, and it's funny how people have the wind taken out of their sails when we had that episode on August 31 and the whole Nazi association, etc., to try and make everyone feel like they needed to feel guilty for wanting to fight back against the government. Like, when does the government get the ability to tell you that you're stupid for thinking that it's the bad guy when it's the bad guy? It doesn't make any sense. So once you get past that and you realize that really what I'm going to do is I'm going to go out to a capital city destination with thousands of other people and take a walk in the sun and talk to other like-minded people and leave it at that if I have to. But at the end of the day, to create bonds with other people and to let the numbers do the talking, like you said, and the great awakening that comes of it. And at the same time, after a week of horrible events, the only way forward is to resist it and say, well, you can't kill us all, and so let's just get out there and do it. I wanted to quickly talk about stagnation, because I feel like that's the other side of this holding back and not being able to advance. So I feel like not only are we stagnated as people, but almost as a species, we haven't really made any mass great discoveries in our lifetimes. Like, I think of the fact that whether people believe in the moon landing or not, like another thing, like you mentioned World War II earlier, as a young kid growing up, people talked about the moon landing like this great thing, and it was just presumed as a kid growing up that we'd go further. We would go back to the moon, we would make it to Mars, and we would make it into further parts of the solar system, etc. And it's never happened. In my lifetime, it's never happened. In your lifetime, it's never happened. And that's just one thing to talk about off planet, but just all sorts of great discoveries. And when you live in a stagnated world, it becomes a drudgery that there's nothing necessarily to look forward to except for routine. It's the summer season, seasonal stuff. we're moving into next month. We've got, Halloween and Melbourne Cup and Christmas and New Year's Eve. And next year it's, Easter and Mother's Day and June long weekend. Like, it's all the same stuff. That's routine, but there's got to be more to it. It's like when you plan to go on a holiday and you save up and you go, okay, I'm going to go here. And that's exciting. You've got something to look forward to. And I wonder if we've stopped doing things like that we're incapable, whether it's a financial thing or something like that, or even the idea of taking a weekend away or a road trip for a day get up early on a Sunday and just go and come back, late at night to cram something in, but to discover something new and different. Like, they're all different scales of the same thing, but it's a reverse to prevent stagnation is what I'm trying to say. And knowing that success breeds success, it's just a different state of mind. Do you have any thoughts?
Lots said there, Jason. I think, the key thing for me personally is moving forward, and time is of the essence. And I appreciate that now. I never understood when people said to me, time flies by as you get older, and boy, really it does fly by. So that's something that I really, really value more than ever. It's actually being in that present moment. I do tend to plan. I'm definitely more of a planner. I don't really sit in the past much. I'm more of a forward thinker, forward planner, on the go kind of person. But I think just, being able to appreciate the present and all the wonderful things that we still have in this world, despite, all the awful news that surround us. I myself personally really love having changed my life over the last 4 years, relocating to the Sunshine State, and being able to explore all the wonderful places here, and focusing and connecting with communities who are more like-minded than, sadly, the southern eastern states. Well, southern eastern states, I think they're still very, very stuck in 2020, 2021 era.
So describe the idea of uprooting your entire life to move to another state to start again. It was one thing to come to Australia as a young person, but as an adult to almost uproot and do it again. Were there similarities, or was it that you had experienced it so there was no fear? What was the anticipation versus the reality like?
Actually, didn't relate it to anything from my childhood. For me, it was like I always wanted to move up to Queensland in my 20s, and opportunities came up, but I was never able to fully grasp those opportunities because of other things that were happening in my life and with my family. And I remember I was almost about to move to the Gold Coast. At the time, they had the not Olympic Games. They had the Commonwealth Games at the time. And I applied for a job, and I got through the third round of interview, and I was about to uproot my life and move up here at the age of 27, I think it was. And then a major event happened in my life, and, I ended up buying a home in South Australia instead. And as you do. But it was kind of a no-brainer for me more recently when I moved up here. I just literally did it in the space of a month. I had to finalize the things that were of preventing me from being able to move interstate, things like, not being able to lawfully leave the state when you are put under those kind of orders, not by your choice, you know, against your natural free will for something that was not even a crime. I think that was a real big push for me to make this happen and make it my reality. And I didn't actually find it hard. I mean, I didn't know a single soul in Queensland when I moved up here, up to the location where I'm based. I packed my bags. I put all of my animals in my car, 2 dogs and a cat. I hatched my bike on the back of my car, got a trailer, and drove up here. I think it took me about 3 days. And I still remember arriving to my rental. And funnily enough, it's the first rental that I've ever rented before, because I either always owned my own home or lived with my family. And, you know, the water wasn't switched on, the electricity wasn't working. And it was just like, I just, you know, drove 3 days. I don't even have my basic needs. So I can't even have a warm shower. That was quite an adventure coming up here. So I haven't looked back. I recently went back to Adelaide and drove through my old neighbourhood and caught up with really, really close friends. And it was a really, really weird, eerie feeling. Like, for me, it didn't feel like home anymore. I felt like a visitor, like a tourist in a city where I spent most of my life and grew up, to the point where I actually even forgot forgot the directions to my work, where I worked for 7 years. So it's funny how, you know, in a fairly short time things can change, but I didn't find it challenging moving up here. I think just because of the mindset that I had.
How about that? I'm still trying to work out how you had a cat in the car with 2 dogs for 3 days. That's something special. How did you manage that?
Oh, there's a really, really funny story about this. So my mum came up with me. We drove up together for the first 3 months. We lived together, and then she went back down to South Australia, and we stopped on the side of the road to have lunch one day, and I think it was somewhere in New South Wales now at the top of my head. And, you know, you can't really let a cat out of the car and expect it to return back to you somewhere in a place where that's foreign to them, because cats don't like relocating, for one, let alone spending 3 hours in a car. So we're just sitting there having lunch, and then at the side of my eye, I see a little black cat. She's a little black cat crossing the road and running into this huge bush, like a 4-5 meter bush that I would literally, you know, I wouldn't be able to find her in that bush if I tried. And we're just sitting there going, great, we've lost our cat. It's going to get dark soon. We have to get to the next place in 4 or 5 hours. Don't know what we're going to do. So my mum and I decided, you stay, you look after the cat, and I'll drive to the next location and we'll somehow sort these things out. As I get into the car, I realise I should just probably check the little cat carrier to make sure that she's not in there. She was just sitting in there sleeping. It was someone else's black cat.
Oh, my goodness. Wow. Of course, because that's what you do. You all take a black cat to have lunch on the side of the road.
Exactly.
Wow. Well, that resolved. That was something else. It's extraordinary, isn't it? But you made it. What a great trip. And you change your life. You don't look back. And you're doing the opposite of stagnating.
Yes.
You refuse to be held back. That's the point. And the motivating fact and something to look forward to. And there you are, building up a company and doing all those great things. Do you think that you're different to anyone else, or is it just a natural course of events that's always led you this way?
I think I had it somewhere in me to always pursue this pathway, but I really needed that push, or as I said to my mum back in 2021, my life is really boring. Every day is the same. I need something exciting to happen in my life. And then like that, within the space of 2 weeks, my life changed forever.
There you go.
In ways that I never could imagine at the time. But, like you said, I think we were born for this, Jason.
Now, I'm just going to make the other point is be careful what you wish for, right?
Yeah, definitely. That was a lesson learned that's been repeated to me on many, many occasions by my mother.
Yeah. I have similar stories, but I do feel like that you must manifest what it is that you want, but you've also got to work out what it is that you want and equally what you don't want. So when you wanted change in your life, you didn't rule out what you didn't want, even though you knew that you wanted something. And maybe that's how the universe sort of reacted. In life, there are certain things that you want. People want to have a relationship. They want to have financial success. They want to have a great job. They want to have great friends. They want to have great time. And all of those things are different things that are worth talking about. Now, we're down to our last few minutes of today's show. And as much as we sort of promised that we would talk about the dating story, and I think we might save that to next week because it's going to take more than a few minutes. But one thing I'd like to share with you is something that I thought that I would do as an adventure, being in we're in different age groups, because I'm focused on what do I do when I don't want to work anymore in terms of retirement. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play a quick ad break, and we'll come back in a minute. And I just want to explain what I discovered and why I thought it appealed, because I don't think it applies to just me or to just you, but there were other people that will work for. Take a look at this. We'll come straight back. What do you think of that?
Very impressive.
It's nice, isn't it? So that's a property that you can buy in Bali, that you can buy as an investment, that you can rent out to tourists who want to stay in a 3-bedroom villa, as an example, or you can go live in it if you wanted to, or you can use it as a holiday. So all options are open. And one of the hardest things was that when you go from dependence to self-sufficiency, and this is the hardest thing, if you were on a UBI, universal basic income, that you accept from the government, I don't think you can ever go on a holiday in your lifetime because you're going to spend everything that you earn, or at least things will adjust to the point where it is subsistence living. You only get the very, very bare minimum. So that for me alone excludes me from ever wanting to participate in a UBI society. Not for me, not doing it. But then you've got to come up with a method. Now, you said that you moved into a rental, but you've purchased property, and I've purchased property myself. But one property can't be enough because you need to generate an income, and people get jealous when you have multiple properties. They think that you're a billionaire or that you're something that you're not very nice. But at the same time, when you go on holidays, when you rent, when you stay in a hotel room, it's owned by a great big, conglomerate. What if you could rent a holiday home from a person like yourself? Check this out just for fun. Have a look at this information. You can buy now in Bali a tropical resort studio from $79,000 that looks like this. Pretty handy. And you can get a rental return for $2,500 a month, and you can buy it for $79,000. When I saw that, it just opened up my mind, because I thought most people in their 30s by now would have $70,000 or $80,000 minimum in their superannuation account that's buying shares in Telstra. Like, that's what got me interested in the first place. And I thought, well, I've heard of self-managed superannuation. Why can't I buy a property using that money? And the other thing that really got me interested in self-managed super, Mariya, was in the early, actually it was in 2019, just as COVID had just announced. I thought, this is an odd thing. I'm a bit worried about my superannuation. If we're going to close down, I want to set up a self-managed super fund, and I want to be able to buy gold and silver with my super, because I think that would be safe. And we actually did that. Now, setting up a self-managed super fund wasn't that difficult, and it wasn't that expensive. You needed about $100,000 in your account to make it economically viable at Australian investment rates. But when I looked at that investment, I thought $2,000 a month, $24,000 a year return on $79,000 investment, that's more than 5%. Taking out all the costs and taxes, etc., I'm still doing quite well. So anyway, that blew my mind. And then I did a little bit more research, and I saw something like this. Check this one out just for fun. Look at this place. Show you another picture. There's another picture and another picture. How about that? You can literally, there's your floor plan. So it's a one-bedroom, like studio-style apartment that you stay in on holidays in Bali. There you go. And you can even put a rooftop mezzanine on it as well. And where is it? Here it is. Look at this. $129,000 special, $4,000 to $6,000 a month rental estimate. One bed, one bath. 26% net.
How quickly can you pay that back, Jason, just based on that?
So if you've got superannuation money, you just buy it outright for cash, or you could, so then you don't have to repay it. You just collect the returns immediately. If you were going to finance something like that, if you're getting a 26% return, technically, let's say you're paying 6% interest, that would mean you'd pay it off in 5 years flat. Who pays off a property in 5 years?
Yeah, wow.
And two things happen, right? One is the value of the property goes up generally, and the price of rent goes up virtually impossibly. It can't, simply because inflation causes it up, supply and demand. So today's rental at 26% in 5 years' time might be 36, 46, 56% rental. Mm-hmm. Those numbers, I think, are staggering, because all of a sudden, if you can create, like every wealth book that's ever been out there says, to create a passive income, it's one thing to bust your backside every week to try and make $500, $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 a week, no matter what people are earning. But wouldn't it be nice if you woke up on a Monday morning and there was $1,200 in the account that you didn't have to work for every week? Or maybe it was $2,000 every month, or who knows what it is. But what I try and say to my kids who are so, Dad, I can't afford to buy a property. I go, I know you can't afford to buy a property. No one can in Australia. But maybe we're not looking at this from the right direction. Maybe we've got to look at it from a different direction now, because people own property in every country in the world. You don't just have to buy it locally. And that's what opens minds. So my son, who's just turned 18, he's like, oh, Dad, how do I do this? Because he's at that age, and that's his mentality, and other kids aren't. So I love the idea that something like that is possible and within reach again, because when I first started out in around 2000, you could buy a one-bedroom unit in Sydney for $200,000 to $250,000. Today, I don't even dare ask. I feel like it would be $750,000 to $1 million for a shoebox, and that doesn't make sense to me. But there's always got to be another way, right?
There's got to be another way. Oh, it's a very good investment, that's for sure.
So look, I find that fascinating, and maybe what we'll do is we'll look at it in a little bit more detail next time, because there's tons of information. What I might do, if anyone is seeing that and wants to know a little bit more, I'll just put up on the screen for you here. If you have an interest, there's my email, jasonqcitizen@gmail.com. In the subject heading, tell me more, and I will happily answer any questions that you've got. And then that will prepare you if you wanted to go and make any official inquiries with the people that I happen to purchase one of those properties with that's currently under construction. So, Mariya, I actually decided to buy one of these.
Beautiful.
With super. I just thought, you know what? I'm going to take a shot, because I don't want any more Telstra shares.
One thing I can agree with is super is a depreciating asset, and it's another scam, not a scheme, another scam that I call. So if you can take the money out and spend it on an investment like this, I think it's the best investment that you can probably make. But, just taking your money out of super to begin with is really smart.
Well, that's an interesting point too, because Jared Rennick at People First also believes in that and wants to make that a policy, that it's your money. Why do you have to have it locked up somewhere else? And it certainly is a valid argument for people trying to get a deposit into their first home. Why would I be saving for when I'm 67, when I'm 27, when 40 years, a lifetime is an eternity? When I'm renting in today's market makes absolutely no sense. So there's got to be another way that you can do that. I've argued that for 20 years. Even when I was in the Labor Party, I used to argue that with senators, and they'd say, oh, we can't touch super. The sky will fall in. We can't do this. We can't do that. I kept saying to them, I'd look at them in the face as a young 30-something. I say, why do you keep saying that we can't? How about you start saying that we can and think differently about it? Because no one's getting anywhere. And specifically at the time, it was the GFC, 2008, when people were really starting to lose properties and having forced to sell up. And I said, if you prevent someone from accessing their super to stop them from losing their own home, and they go bankrupt and they're in their 20s and 30s, it takes you at least 7 years to turn that around and try and start again in a brand new market at double the price. And if you're in your 40s and 50s and go bankrupt, you may never get back into the property market again. Your life is over. Why would you do that when you've got a pot of gold sitting there that you're allowed to touch in another 15 years' time that's worthless to you then if you've got to pay rent in your retirement? It makes no sense. And they just looked at me like I was dumb. That's when I knew that politics, there's more to it, and it's not a hierarchy or a group of authority or special people. It's just ordinary people in a system that is designed to swallow you into a single mindset that doesn't work. And that's where my interest in politics came from. So I'm hoping that as we conclude today's show, Mariya, that we've planted a few seeds for people to start conversations and thinking. And you're welcome to talk to us, talk amongst your friends, etc. Question everything, do your due diligence. But I hope that we've come up with a few ideas of interest when you watch this show back, perhaps on a Sunday morning or something like that.
Thanks, Jason. And it's music to my ears, what you've just said. It's everything that I've been saying over the last 5 years myself as well. So yeah, definitely question the narrative and look at alternative ways in which you can create your wealth.
Yeah, that's it. Not so hard, is it? Well, Mariya, it's been a whole lot of fun. It's been great to catch up again for episode number 2, and I look to regroup next week and advance the cause. And I'm really hoping that the world takes a turn for the positive, and we can all have a more positive outlook, etc. And I also hope that the rallies were a great success for you, and you made 1 or 2 new friends and realised that you do have all the power. Thanks everyone for watching.
Thank you. Until next week.